I was an accused witch in the Salem witch trials, and this is my story. It all started one cold evening when I heard a knock on my door. I remember because I was in the middle of baking and I had a terrible cold. Anyways, I went to answer the door, and when I opened it, there was a mob of people outside. They were angry and cursed at me and brought me to the house of Mr. Warren. I didn't really understand what was happening, but then the crowd backed up and they left me in front of Mr. Warren, who was very upset. He pointed to his daughter, who stood nearby in a very unnatural position, and began to accuse me for witchcraft. He said his daughter has been afflicted and acting possessed, and when they tried to find out what was causing it, she began to murmur my name. And then she went on about how she had seen me in the woods practicing witchcraft. I was absolutely shocked. So then the very next day, I heard another knock on my door. And this time, it was a man from Salem's court of law demanding that I come to court immediately to be tried as a witch, all because of that one little girl's accusations. So I had to go with him, and then he threw me immediately into jail, and it was filled with mold and rats, and it was disgusting. And he said I'd have to wait there, like I could go anywhere else, until my trial, which wasn't until the next day. So I woke up, and it was to the jailer's obnoxious banging on my bars, and I was brought out to the court and went through the whole trial. Mr. Warren and his daughter were there, of course, as witnesses, although they didn't witness anything. And then about an hour through, I sneezed loudly because of my cold I still had. And when I did, Mr. Warren's daughter made a really weird sound, and she threw herself about in sync with me, though way more exaggerated. And all of a sudden, the whole court gasped, and Mr. Warren leaped up, yelling that this was proof that I had taken over her spirit and was a witch. And they believed him. And then his daughter started screaming and pointing at me, yelling that she saw a yellow bird between my fingers. And all of a sudden the crowd was in an uproar, yelling accusations at me and cursing. And the judge took all this from the very theatrical girl and said it was sure evidence that I was indeed a witch. It was so unfair. Next thing I know, I was brought back to my prison cell, and a few hours later, the jailer came in with a piece of paper, and he nailed it to my wall, and then left again. I went to look at it, and written across the top it said, "Death Note." And then it went on to say that I'd been accused of being a witch, and I'd be hung the next evening. I was terrified. I'd heard stories of many other accused witches, and I guess in the trials I didn't get it too bad. I heard of others who had much more horrible experiences while in court. Several were brought out to the river, and the people would tie their hands and feet together and attach a huge stone to the ropes, and then they'd be lowered over the river and dropped in. It was supposed to be that if they floated, they were witches, but of course none of them did, and they died anyways when they sank to the bottom. One old man had even been pressed to death. But either way, I was still in this horrible cell with a death note hanging over my head, and I knew I had to get out somehow. And well, that's a whole other story, but I did manage to escape. In fact, I was the only one. All the others who had been accused were hung, though some had been smart enough to confess, even though they really were innocent, and they were allowed to live. But some who were even said to be innocent died in jail just because they didn't have enough money to pay for the very chains that were binding them. So, after I escaped, I ran far, far away, and I've been living in hiding ever since. This is just one of many people's stories from the Salem witch trials.